Hello, good morning. Today our guest is Professor Luigi Zingales. Hello, Professor Zingales. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. What about you?
I am great, Luigi. I have been wanting to interview you for some time, and today is the day. So, Luigi, we're going to be talking about some of your recently published articles. Around 2019 or 2020, you published a piece titled Taste for Competition and the Gender Gap Among Young Business Professionals. Luigi, what motivated this research?
As you know, there is increasing attention for what is called the glass ceiling, the difficulties that women have in reaching the top level of the corporate ladders. And people are questioning whether this is due to discrimination, to taste, or some other factors. And one hypothesis that people have advanced is that maybe there is a difference in the taste for competition, how much you're willing to engage in competitive races, and that this might have some impact in the differential success of men and women in the workplace. And because with my co-author Paola Sapienza, we had engaged a long time ago in a large study of MBA students at Chicago, we thought that we had a perfect sample to analyze this problem.
All right then, Luigi. And the conclusions are quite revealing. So, for instance, you also looked at the role played by competitive tendencies in selecting the MBA. Are MBA students more competitive on average?
So this is a bit difficult because our sample is made only of MBA students, so we can't really make a comparison with others. But I think that we do observe quite a difference in the degree of taste of competition between men and women within the sample of MBAs of Chicago.
And the business is competitive. So although you did not directly address this issue, more than likely someone who intends to study business will be a competitive person.
No, first of all, I want to be very clear that this is taste for competition, not how competitive you are. In a sense, you might like to play cards, for example, but you might be a disaster at playing cards. So being competitive and liking the competition are two different things.
Exactly. All right then. So do gender differences in competition exist?
Yeah, I think people have observed this is not original to us. Niederle at Stanford is the one who first showed this. I think that there is a difference in taste for competition in general between men and women. Now, of course, this is an average statement of there is plenty of variation, but on average, that is the case. What is interesting is that we find that this taste for competition explains a little bit of the gender gap in compensation just out of business school. But when we observe the same sample 7 years later, we don't find taste for competition to matter at all, at least by itself.
Yes, and this is really surprising. You actually note that overly competitive graduates in the long term, they did not earn as much.
It's not just overly competitive. These are people who have a very high taste for competition, but also overestimate their performance. So following up on the example I was saying before, if you like to play cards, if you like to play poker, but you're really bad at playing poker, you don't make a lot of money long term, which makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Luigi, confidence, I believe, has some explanatory value, but can overconfidence ever be negative?
Yeah, I think that, as I was saying earlier, if you are overconfident in your ability to play cards and you play cards and you like to play cards, you're going to play cards a lot, and you're going to lose a lot. If you're very shy, if you think you're not very good at it, you might like the competition, but you're trying to stay away. And what we find, which is quite interesting, is that when it comes down to compensation, in the long term, if you are overconfident and you like competition, you tend to be penalized in terms of compensation.
Confidence is important, but it must also be tempered with calculated risk and logic. So some time ago, The Economist magazine published a feature on women entrepreneurs. And although studies usually show that men have a higher tolerance for risk, and this is one reason why men are more likely to be entrepreneurs, The Economist magazine also noted that women were more likely to take calculated risk, and as such, women hedge funds, they didn't lose as much as male dominated hedge funds.
Yeah, I think that I want to be very clear here, because what we observe are differences on average, but there is no indication that these differences are genetic. They could be completely environmental. So even the difference for risk aversion, we don't know whether it's because you're born genetically more tolerant to risk, or because society has shaped you into being less penalized if you make a mistake, if you're a man versus a woman. So yes, there is this difference in risk aversion, but again, we don't know whether this is environmental or genetic.
Don't worry, Professor Zingales, you're an economist and the paper is not measuring genetics, so it's okay to be careful. I've actually interviewed some people with training in genetics and psychology, but this debate is not about biology today.
Good.
Yeah, it's not about biology.
No,
But
but it's very easy when you say men and women to think about this. This is related to the genetic of men and women, and it might be. I don't know. The simple thing is we cannot know. What the only thing is we observe this correlation. I have another paper showing that in women with more testosterone tend to be less risk averse, which is again could be interpreted as genetic, but could be interpreted as environmental, because the level of testosterone has a lot to do with the environment that surrounds us.
yes, and they can either be socially determined or, as some would argue, genetically determined. Like Luigi Guiso, he has a paper on female managers, and he argues that female managers tend to express masculinized traits.
It's possible, yeah.
Yeah. But as I said, we're not talking about genes today. But Luigi, in your field, the field of economics, many academics are actually studying the interplay between genes and development. And if you're interested, there are many really good studies published by Enber looking at the link between genes and traits like even risk tolerance and investing in the stock market.
Yeah, I know. Thank you.
Yeah. But you have been in the business of economics and research for years, longer than I have, and I'm really interested in gender differences in competition and entrepreneurship. Luigi, based on studies that you have conducted and studies that you have read, what are the traits that are correlated with entrepreneurship?
Um, I think that certainly risk aversion is a factor, but my understanding is there are two other factors that are very important. One is the ability to be kind of a jack of all trade, so to be pretty good at doing multiple things, which is not something that is easy to capture, but I think is an important variable. And two, I think that connections are very important. I think that especially in the early phases of any business, if you can have free advice from a lot of people, you can easily get ahead. And I think that connections are very important at all time, but particularly in early phase of businesses.
I'm happy that we're talking about connections, Luigi, because some time ago I was doing some research on entrepreneurship and I was reading an article asserting the argument that men and women do network, but men have deeper networks, whereas women tend to network closer with people they already know. Have you stumbled across anything like this in your research?
No, I've not, but it seems an interesting idea.
Yes. And Luigi, I do know that competitiveness is correlated with entrepreneurship. There's a paper titled Gender Differences in Competitiveness, Risk Tolerance, and Other Personality Traits. Do they contribute to the gender gap in entrepreneurship? And this is the conclusion of the co-authors, but competitiveness serves a purpose, but can it ever be a disadvantage?
I think our research shows yes. If you are over optimistic, overconfident about your characteristics, you do get engaged in competition you shouldn't get engaged in, and this can be pretty expensive.
Yes, Luigi, and they have a real life case study. So in Jamaica, there was a financial crisis in the 90s, and during that period, many financial institutions and some non-financial institutions were quite competitive, and as such, they were deviated from their original mandates. However, in the long term, the companies that remained invested in their original objectives, they did not fail during the financial storm.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is speaking to your comparative advantage or being overconfident, but I think that that's
Both. It can be both. So if
yeah,
you're making 100 million a year in banking, you're a banker, but your staff members, they don't understand cryptocurrency. You don't understand cryptocurrency, but because we want to prove that you're overly competitive, you venture into cryptocurrency. More than likely, if you lack accurate market data, you're going to lose. So Carl Icahn said that these guys, they're smart, but they don't understand crypto, so he's ignoring crypto.
yeah, that sounds a very good idea.
Yeah, so it's good to be competitive, but people should know their limits. So I'm not a theoretical physicist, so no, I'm not going to talk about physics.
That sounds great.
Yeah, so what I like about research is that when you appreciate it well and understand it properly, you can apply to everyday issues. This is one of the reasons why I love research. So reading an article on competitiveness is not just about economics or development at the macro level, but also at the micro level and how we interrelate with each other.
That's
Yes.
true.
Yes. So, Luigi, in the paper, you also said that men get larger bonuses. Why?
So I will distinguish very much at graduation and later on. So we observe this group of people when they graduate and 7 years later. And at graduation, we observe a slightly larger bonus for men, which is kind of surprising because these data, of course, are dated, but even 10 years ago, companies were trying to be fairly gender neutral. So it is a little bit of a puzzle of why men are getting a larger bonus. When it comes to 7 years down the line, we see much larger bonus for men than for women. And this is in part in line with what the literature found, but I think that's particularly pronounced because most of these MBAs are engaged in high power careers with a lot of variability in compensation. And so bonuses do represent a large chunk of their compensation.
And it could also be a consequence of industry concentration.
No, we control for
Or
that.
you control for that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it is definitely true that in finance you have larger bonuses than, for example, in consulting. But even controlling for the industry, you do find that man receives much larger bonuses. Now, even in finance, of course, there are different professions because not an MBA would be a bank teller, but just to give you a sense, you can be a bank teller, you can be the the trader of an hedge fund and you're still in finance. So of course they're not the same profession, but trying to do our best to control for the same job, we still find that men receive larger bonuses.
Luigi, I know that this is quite complicated, but did you also control for negotiation? The ability of one to negotiate. I know it's a bit technical, but did you control for that any at all?
So what we have is that when we observe people at graduation, we have an interesting variable that can proxy for your either ability or willingness to negotiate, and this is whether you have multiple offers. And as you know, MBAs go to the job market, and some people like get one job offer and they stick to it, and others sort of go for multiple. And what we find is that the male advantage in bonuses is entirely concentrated in cases where you have multiple job offers. So it seems to be consistent with the idea that has something to do with your ability to negotiate or your willingness to negotiate, or a combination of the two.
But Luigi, you also mentioned multiple job offers. Could it also be that men are willing to work in locations that are far away from where they presently reside?
It's possible, but here we're talking about at the end of the MBA program. So that is a moment where people are fairly mobile. MBAs tend to be fairly mobile. And yes, it is true that if you are married, for example, you have client limitations depending on what your spouse does. But I think that a limited number of MBAs is married at that phase of their life. And so I think that job mobility doesn't seem to be the driving force. But and these are just job offers, so it's not even obvious that they have to move. This is just they are considering that possibility. So I think it has more to do with willingness or ability to negotiate.
All right, Luigi, and we're still on the topic of negotiation because recently I read a story on Yahoo News noting that some states are well, they're not about to do it, but they did already. Some states banned employers from asking employees what they earned in their previous jobs, and some states are also planning to ban employers from asking prospective employees how much they would like to earn. And I'm asking this question because I haven't studied it yet in depth, but I'm superficially, I've been looking at negotiation and the role that it plays in the gender pay gap. Is it that men are overconfident and as such they overrate themselves? And this is a channel through which they end up earning more than women.
I think is certainly a possibility. The evidence I've seen is that men tend to be more aggressive also because they are socially penalized less for being aggressive. Aggressive women tend to be more socially penalized. And so in certainly being a bit more aggressive, it is good in a negotiation. Now, if you're overly aggressive, can backfire. But I think a little bit of aggressiveness in negotiation is helpful.
Yeah, I do agree. This question is a bit is not directly related to the conversation, but Luigi, in school, students who study international relations, they learn negotiation. Business students also learn negotiation. But should this skill be diffused throughout the education system?
I think that some minimum level probably would be helpful for everybody because in many situations in your life, you end up in negotiating things. But remember that a lot of the negotiation skills tend to be useful for the individuals, but not necessarily useful for society because many negotiations end up being a zero-sum game. So it's not obvious that there is a lot of societal value in teaching negotiation to everybody.
Yes, but life is really about negotiation. It's like me. If I send a request, the person may say yes or no. And sometimes if the person says no, I can get him or her to say yes. So we negotiate every day.
Yeah, no, it's certainly something that you use it a lot.
Yeah, we know we we negotiate every day, but like most policies in life, we must strike a balance. There are cases when being dominant will ensure that the prospective employee or the current employee is rewarded, and there are other cases when dominance is excessive. So in a workplace, for instance, there's a relationship between yourself and your boss, and there's an obvious power imbalance. So when you're negotiating with your boss or relating with him or her, you need to know when to be tactful. It may sound simple, but it has huge implications. This is
Absolutely.
this is what
No, no, I think
employers
it's
call
important.
soft skills.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and even in my own life, Luigi, I recognize that some people don't do as well as they ought to because they lack soft skills. Some years ago, I was a student in high school, and the librarian was speaking to another person, and I was really busy. I needed to get not an assignment. I wasn't trying to secure the tools for an assignment. I wanted to get a book or do some research. So I ran through the conversation, and the librarian obviously was infuriated, and I apologized, and we became really good friends. And she was the librarian, so obviously I would have benefited from that relationship. Whereas if I were a bit impulsive, I would have responded erratically and in a very disrespectful manner, and that would have put me as a student in grave problems. You don't want the librarian to be your enemy.
That's true.
Yeah, so these stories may sound simple and silly, but in the real world, the payoffs are great. You need to know when to be nice and when to be dominant. Now, Luigi, you also write extensively on the firm. What is a firm, Luigi, and why do firms exist?
Okay, that's not an easy question because people have been struggling to answer this question for a long, long time. But basically, following what Cole said almost a century ago, um, firms are organization where you suspend the working of the market system and you replace it with the work of authority or with the power of authority. Island of conscious power in an ocean of basically unconscious cooperation.
And why do they exist?
They exist because using the marketplace in every transaction can be extremely costly. There are costs, as you said, in negotiation. So if every transaction needs to be set up in the marketplace, we have to pay a transaction cost. There may be some opportunism, and if I want to foster long-term relationship and I want to foster specific investments, is I want to create an environment where the marketplace is muted and we operate under different principles. It's a bit like in a family. Why do families exist? Is because within the family you are suspending the market system and you operate on a different principle.
Yes, in the family, children don't work, but we still invest in their well-being.
But not only that, is that you don't allocate who does what based on the opportunity cost. That would be considered very abusive if you were to do that.
And the cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of us are sentimental about our loved ones. We're not going to say, "Oh, I refuse to invest in your well-being because 2 years ago you didn't lend me 10 grand." No, most people are not like that. Some people are, but most of us are not like that. Firms. So we're still on the topic of firms. In a society, firms create value. They create value by investing in institutions. They may build foundations, they create economic value and also innovative value. But you say, Luigi, that firms should maximize shareholder welfare and not market value. What's the difference?
It's very simple. If I am an entrepreneur and I run a firm, I tend to run the firm to maximize my welfare, not my uh, uh, simple payoff, material payoff, because I might care about things other than just my salary or my profits. And I think that's kind of obvious. Now, what we have forgotten is that once two or three of us get together and form a corporation, uh, in is we end up basically concentrated on the minimum common denominator among us, which is probably just money. And if we all agree that this is the only thing we want to do, that is fine. But uh, when companies tend to be involved in decision where they have a huge comparative advantage in intervening, so think about pollution, then maximizing purely shareholders' value might lead to outcomes that are very bad for society in general and might not even be the one that we individually want. So imagine that I own some shares in a company, and this company has the choice between investing in some pollution abatement or dumping the toxic waste into the river. And for simplicity, they just assume that there is no regulation. So the firm can dump the toxic waste in the river and get away with that. And are we saying that firms should dump the toxic waste into the river? No. And why are we saying no? Is because I think that each one of us has some sense of responsibility, and they are willing to maybe get a little bit less money in order to do the right thing. Now, we might not be willing to give up all our profits for that, but a teeny tiny bit of our profits for doing the right thing, I think most of us are willing to do it. Now, unfortunately, the way corporate America is structured these days is that that component is completely absent. And firms feel compelled to maximize just the value at the expense of everything else. And what I am saying, with I and Oliver Hart are saying, is that we should reintroduce the idea that there is more than just money in our utility function, and firms should consider that as well.
All right, so you're essentially arguing that firms should care about the long-term welfare of shareholders, and and moreover, I don't know if you're familiar with this argument, Luigi, but there is the assumption that companies have been cutting back on R&D in order to improve costs, sorry, not improve costs, in order to reduce costs and profitability. So this could be an example. In the short term, R&D is expensive. Many R&D projects fail. So in some industries, for example, they're more likely to fail than to succeed. But the gains of a successful R&D program are just immeasurable.
I think is related, but it's not exactly the same thing. So to the extent the company captures all the benefits of R&D, then the argument is different, because it's simply a myopic argument that certainly is an issue, but is not the issue we are focusing on. If you are saying, and I think that you hinted at that, if you're saying that, of course, there are uh, benefits to society overall that are not captured just in the profits of the firm for innovation, then they are the same argument. So if I invest in a vaccine, I think about a vaccine against malaria, maybe I cannot monetize fully the benefits of the vaccine because malaria tend to hit countries that are poor, so that they don't have a lot of ability to pay. However, I do create a lot of benefits to humankind. So, to the extent that shareholders care about that, that's part of maximizing shareholders' welfare and not value.
But Luigi, what should companies do when they become really susceptible to the demand of shareholders? Let's say that company A wants to invest in R&D, but it's a long-term strategy, and shareholders want short-term gains. How should a company respond?
I actually think that the company should go to the shareholders and ask what they want. At the end of the day, they are paying the cost. And here I am with Milton Friedman that says that if the manager imposes his or her will over the shareholders, is a form of taxation without representation. So I think that we should try to fix the friction that leads shareholders to be myopic. But if I don't want to invest in the long term, who are you to force me to do that? In a free society, I cannot force you to do anything. So why should I, as a manager, be able to force you to do something against your will?
All right, Luigi. I bought some shares in a Jamaican company, and whenever I visit the AGM of this particular company, a lady, she goes to the podium and she says that she wants a gender quota. No, a study was published in the Journal of Financial Economics saying that there isn't a relationship between gender quota and firm profitability, and the results have been replicated by other publications. As a shareholder and someone who's business oriented, I'm not particularly sentimental. I respect people and I respect their value. I don't care if the person is a man, a woman, a Muslim, gay, or eccentric. That's not my business. I care about value creation. And as a shareholder, I'm rational. I like value. That's the only thing that I care about. So a shareholder wants a company to mandate gender quotas. Yes, that's the opinion of the shareholder or shareholders. But if there's not a correlation between gender quotas and profitability, should we really listen to that shareholder or shareholders?
I think we should vote. If the majority of shareholders are willing to give up some of their profits in order to promote more gender equality, I don't know why we should get in the way. Vice versa, if the majority of the shareholders don't want to do that, again, I don't know why we should be in the way. Now, we can discuss whether we should intervene as government and as a regulation, but that's not the question. Sticking to sort of the private corporate governance, I'm in favor of letting shareholders decide because they are the one bearing the cost.
All right. And Luigi, you actually discuss what not the issue of gender quotas, but socially responsible issues more broadly in a paper titled Exit and Voice.
Yes. So in one of the questions that we face once we realize that companies should maximize shareholders' welfare is how do shareholders communicate their preferences to managers? After all, a word of shareholders' value maximization is a relatively simple word because I don't need to know you, Lipton, what you like. I can maximize expected profits and not care about your own individual preferences. But if we are trying to maximize welfare, we do care about the preference of shareholders. And the question is how shareholders can communicate those preferences. And so, and what form of communication of these preferences lead to better or worse outcome from a social point of view. And so in that particular paper, what we show is that if you go the exit route, through either divestment or boycotting, depending on whether you are on the shareholder side or the worker or consumer side. You can influence a big companies, but number one, you don't influence that much, and number two, your impact is less than proportional to the number of people divesting or boycotting. So, the market system tends to moot your decision, your impact. By contrast, what we show is that if you go the voice route, at least when it comes to shareholders, then you can be very effective. Not only this, what we show is that if shareholders are well diversified, like we advocate in finance classes, then and they're allowed to vote on the corporate decisions, they will behave as a social planner will, as long as they have a teeny tiny bit of pro-social mentality. So as long as you put an epsilon weight on the welfare of other people, when you are well diversified and you vote in a corporate election, you end up voting like the social planner will vote.
All right. So when we talk about socially responsible options and policies, clearly we're not referring to pollution. But Luigi, again, being the compelling researcher that you are, with your co-author Roy Shapiro, you produced a paper titled "Is Pollution Value Maximizing? The DuPont Case." Can pollution create value?
The unfortunate answer is yes, and that's also the problem. That's what I was describing earlier. In that paper, what we document is that not only, that's a fact, DuPont in 1984 dumped knowingly a large amount of a very toxic substance, PFOA, in the Ohio River, indirectly producing the death and the disease of a lot of people. What we show in that paper is that even if you were perfectly rational and anticipated what will happen to the company, etc., and the cost that your pollution produced and the liability that generated, etc., to the extent you attributed a probability of being caught, which is less than 20%, which is very reasonable given the circumstances, then your choice would have been to pollute. So the reason why we did the study is to show that, unfortunately, pollutions and environmental scandals are not just mistakes, but are systematic because the incentives to behave correctly are not there.
But can property rights mitigate the effects of pollution? I'm familiar with the case of the Audubon Society.
I think that theoretically, yes, practically, and that's part of the value of this paper, practically it's very difficult. So if you have a system of liability that impose a penalty that is large enough in case you're caught to compensate for all the times you're not caught, then of course you can have a optimal behavior just by enforcing strict liability. What we show in that paper is that not only this does not happen because eventually there are some limits about the liability you impose because you don't want to destroy the company, and companies play games in spinning off the toxic component exactly like DuPont did. In fact, today, the part that polluted is not part of DuPont anymore, it's part of Chemours. But most importantly, it's very difficult for the EPA or any agency to identify the problems and catch, because most of the information is in the hands of companies themselves. So the PFOA is a substance that has been around since the late 50s, but very few people knew the toxic properties of that substance. except the people using it. So DuPont and 3M had done studies and had seen that PFOA is very toxic. In fact, there is a tragic story of a kid who was born from a woman working in the DuPont plant that has major birth defects as a result of the pollution of the PFOA. So they knew damn well how dangerous the stuff was, but they were the only one, and the EPA had no idea. And the force in shaping regulation, thanks to the litigation, we found that the EPA issue regulation that was drafted by DuPont itself with the software. You can see who generated the first draft of a Word file, and the first draft was generated by DuPont. So the capture of the regulation is at such a high level that is very difficult for society to impose penalties that are large enough to deter. And then people very loosely talk about reputation. But one of the interesting things about that paper is we go and look at the history of all the people involved in this decision in 1984. And many of them are dead now, and none pay for, in reputational terms, for what they did. In fact, one of the CEOs who basically witnessed, I don't know whether he was directly involved in this decision, but certainly oversaw a company that dumped PFOA in the Ohio River. That CEO, when he died, had an obituary celebrating him as an environmental pioneer, because he had done other actions that were highly publicized that gave him that reputation. And so I think that both in terms of legal liability and in terms of reputational liability, unfortunately, environmental crime pays, and pays too much.
Excellent summation. I am not particularly familiar with the DuPont case, so your thoughts were quite knowledgeable. I've been learning a lot. But we're planning to wrap up soon. But before we wrap up, Luigi, insider trading. I did not intend to ask a question pertaining to insider trading, but when we were talking about pollution, it was just emanating in my head. Should insider trading be illegal?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to have an equal playing field in the stock market, you need to give everybody the same access to information. And insider trading, by breaking that equality of access, creates not only an unfair playing field, but also discourage individual investors from participating in the stock market. And so has both bad distributional effect and bad efficiency effect, because the cost of capital will be higher, and the ability of companies to grow will be limited, and so on and so forth.
All right, Luigi, and insider trading is actually illegal, but market asymmetries are not rare. They do exist. Different actors may have more access to information than other agents, and also more superior access to information. So again, some time ago, you produced a paper, The Political Limits of Economics. Are you saying that economics should care about normative questions and ethical questions? Because insider trading is really an ethical issue.
No, actually, insider trading has both elements to it, because I can easily make an efficiency argument to dismiss it. Now, as you notice, I use both if you want, moral and efficiency argument to it, or distributional and efficiency argument to it. But the insider trading can be attacked on both grounds. But in some situation, you can't. In some situation, like take the extreme situation of monopoly with perfect price discrimination. As economists, we say that's perfectly efficient. but that means that all the value is captured by basically the shareholders at the expense of consumers. And so generally, the distributional effects are incredibly unequal. And so what I argue in that short paper is that as economists, we should know our own limitation and present the option, but be aware that politically people can do other decision. That if society thinks that, for example, the distribution of income is too unfair, they might put some restriction on the ability to price discriminate, precisely for equity argument, not efficiency argument. This is something that we as economists are not very good at sorting out, but we should also know our own limitations.
Yes. So, Luigi, are you saying that the cost of insider trading are greater than its benefits? Because some have argued that insider trading can be beneficial by showing us by commenting basically on new information. It's just a signaling mechanism.
Yeah, this is an old argument made by Harry Manning a long time ago, and certainly there is some element of truth in the fact that information transfer faster to prices. But I think that the insider trading, in my view, can be argued and can be banned on purely economic arguments without resorting to equity arguments, because I think that if I know that there are a lot of informed traders that trade against me, I am not willing to trade. And I'm not even willing to invest in the equity market. And at the end of the day, if the majority of Americans don't want to invest in the equity market, we all lose.
Exactly. Yes, I get you clearly. The dominance of insider trading will preclude others from investing, and investing is already risky. So I get your point clearly. Luigi, I'm really enjoying our conversation, but unfortunately, I have to wrap up. But speaking to you has been a pleasure, Luigi.
Likewise.
Yes, all right, bye.
Bye-bye.